I really like the title of this message. I'm sure you all did. It's very Christmassy. It's entitled Shining Light on Skulls in the Swamp. We'll do this like a Bible study. So what do you think I'm talking? Read my mind for me. When I talk about having skulls in the swamp, what do you think I'm talking about? What? Dead bones? Well, yeah, it could be dead bones, I guess. I mean, literally, I guess if you were like Peter Reinbart, Peter Reinbart went to the door of his home in Chester, England in 1983, and he knew immediately that at last the jig was up. Because in a way, he was sort of relieved as the police showed up at his door that he'd been caught. 20 years before, his wife had disappeared. And though the authorities had suspected Reinbart, they couldn't find any proof of foul play until now, where out back in the peat bog behind his house, workers had discovered a human skull. And so Peter Reinbart just confessed it all. He was guilty. Caught at last. Kind of at least the fear would be gone of living all that time with the fear of being caught because of the skull in the swamp. But it wasn't until the trial was well underway that laboratory tests actually showed that the skull that the workers had found was that of a woman who had died more than 1,600 years ago before the Romans left Britain. He got trapped by his own guilt. He knew there was a skull in the swamp that was his, and so when they found a skull, he just naturally assumed, they got me. And folks, is that not our human experience? Now, hopefully not in such a violent way, and yet for most of us, folks, I think there is always a skull in the swamp. Big or small. I can still vividly remember an experience I had as a fourth grader. My mom, I came from a very poor family, but a very proud family, and my mom and dad had a standing rule for all 7 of us kids. You never, ever, ever take money from people. Whatever money we get, we earn. Never take money from people. So one day I had been out. One of my buddies in crime gave me a quarter, and I bought 25, back then it was penny pieces of bazooka bubble gum. Did you know that you can fit 25 penny pieces of bazooka bubble gum in your mouth at one time? You can. You really can. In fact, I did. And so I go walking into the kitchen of our house up off the back porch with 25 pieces of bazooka bubble gum, and I don't have a penny to my name, 25 penny pieces of bazooka bubble gum. And I walk in the kitchen, I see my mom, she's cooking, and it dawns on me, I have a skull in my mouth that is going to give me away. And I began to panic, and I started to think, oh no, what can I do? If I don't do something, she's going to catch me. I'm going to be in trouble. So I was trying to figure out how to get out of this, and I simply said, hey Mom, where's the broom? I'll go outside and broom the porch. Why are you shaking your head? It was a dead giveaway. It's like, oh, my mom says, what? What? You're volunteering to go sweep the porch? And so she comes to me and she says, Brad, what did you do? And what do you think, Brad? I must have been in like second grade. I still remember this. In fact, I still have nightmares about this sometimes. What do you think Brad began doing? Blubbering. Oh! I confessed everything. You know, she drug that confession out of me like only a mother can actually do to a kid. I confessed everything to her. I was betrayed by my skull in the swamp. I mean, my mom hadn't even noticed that anything was wrong until I volunteered to help. And so for most of us, folks, there is always a skull in the swamp. It seems that there is always a cloud on the horizon. And it's not that we even intentionally do wrong, although sometimes we do. But we just know ourselves. We know our guilt, even if other people don't, right? We know what we have buried unnoticed in a dozen convenient swamps. So I'd like you to take just 15 seconds right now, if you would, and I would like you to close your eyes and to think with me right now about just one of your buried skulls. That money you took, that lie you told, that friend you betrayed, that test you cheated on, that indiscretion, that unfaithfulness, that addiction. You find it difficult thinking about that stuff? Does it cause pain? Did you ever think that if someone ever finds out what we are really, really like, what if I'm caught? The Gospel of John tells the story of a woman who was caught in adultery. The scriptures say caught in the very act. And for her, as for Peter Reinbart, and as for me as a child, and maybe for you, that nightmare had become real. And after all those years, she was found out. And what she had tried to hide was now public knowledge. And in a public place, they were talking about her. The leading citizens of the town, and they were accusing her before this traveling teacher, Jesus. She'd been caught, and she stood before Jesus waiting for her to condemn her because she knew she deserved it, as do we. And at least the fear of being caught was gone. What do you think, folks, that she thought about as a part of her mind listened to the accusations? What do you suppose Peter Reinbart thought about when that knock on the door and the police car was outside came? You see, folks, we have been through enough similar experiences ourselves. We actually know in our hearts what they thought about. How did I get in this mess? How did it start? How could this be happening to me? That's what they thought about. And like a movie, the present fades away, and we remember the first insignificant step that started the ill-fated journey we find ourselves on. How did this start? How did it start for you? Was it a surprising look exchanged, or a brush of the hands, or an innocent flirtation? Was it that first tiny opportunity for an incorrect entry in the books? Was it the first tiny lie of convenience, which proved to be a prolific breeder of other lies? Was it the first time that he or she lost my respect? Is that how it started? You see, when the skull is finally dug up, most of us can trace the journey back to some, well, this doesn't count moment of disloyalty or foolishness or anger or lovelessness. But we discover it does count. And it keeps on counting, and it keeps on building, and it keeps on multiplying, because it is with small steps that such horrendous journeys always begin. I can still remember, this is a true story, the lament of a friend of Sherry and I's whose marriage had collapsed after she had taken on a lover. And about the lover and herself, she said, how could two such moral people be involved in something that looks so immoral? Duh! It's because it is immoral. But I actually know how. It was just one step at a time. And so we often fail to consider the gradual, cumulative effect of sin in our lives. In St. Louis in 1984, a cleaning woman noticed that there were a few bees buzzing around the attic of her home. And since there were only a few, she didn't really make any effort to actually deal with them. And over the summer, the bees continued to fly in and out of the attic vent while the woman remained totally unconcerned. They weren't bothering her. And so, unaware of this growing city of bees, the whole attic became a beehive. And the ceiling of the second floor bedroom finally caved in under the weight of hundreds of pounds of honey and thousands of angry bees. And while the woman did escape serious injury, she was unable to repair the damage of her accumulated neglect. You see, folks, long before we're caught and hauled out into public view, we are affected by our guilt. We have no details on the thinking of the sinful woman in Jesus' story because the scriptures don't tell us. But we don't really need them, do we? Because we can supply plenty of our own. We know what guilt does because we know what guilt does to us. It affects us inwardly. It's like a strong acid that we cannot safely contain. It eats at people. And a large proportion of the people who come to psychiatrists or psychologists or pastors for help are actually struggling with guilt. Someone actually quipped one time that neurotics build castles in the air, psychotics live in them, and psychiatrists charge both of them rent. And usually those castles, folks, are guilt-colored. Guilt troubles us even when we are not caught. And the world may not know what we have done, but we know. And we're marked by this knowledge. And we're not always aware of the subtle changes in attitudes and relationships that guilt brings to us, that strange defensiveness, that unexplained hostility, that growing cynicism. But for a person weighed down with guilt about an indiscretion not yet found out, there is no such thing as an innocent remark. What do they mean by that statement? Do they know? Have they found out? And most of us know how we feel when we're driving down the highway, right? And we glance up in the mirror to see a police car right behind us. Even when we're driving within the speed limit, we remember 10 minutes ago when we weren't. So it's been said that the best safety device in a car is the rearview mirror with a policeman in it. Because guilt marks us inwardly. And we begin to see policemen on every corner. Maybe we even begin to see God only as a policeman. It marks us inwardly. It actually marks us outwardly as well, because we lose so much by our sin. In fact, folks, that's why it is a sin. God's not out there trying to ruin the fun that we have in our lives. God gives us His law that sometimes makes us feel guilty, not because He wants to ruin our fun, but because in His wisdom He knows that when we involve ourselves in that type of behavior, who gets hurt? We do. And He loves us. We lose so much by our sin. It's why it is a sin. It's an act that hurts someone, that damages something, that tears down something precious. And sins aren't sins because God's put them on a list. They're on the list because they destroy and dilute the truly good things of life. They hurt marriages. They hurt relationships. They hurt people. And forgiveness does not erase the damage. Do you hear me? Forgiveness doesn't erase the damage caused by past sins. If you play with fire, you get burned. Yes, the burn may heal, but the pain has been suffered. When Moses exploded in anger against God in that trek through the wilderness, he was forgiven, but he lost the promised land in this life. Sin and guilt make marks on people's lives. Promises are broken, vows ignored, integrity abandoned, trust betrayed. And lives are changed so that no amount of abject regret or heartfelt confession on our part can change that. The woman standing before Jesus may have been sorry, but all that sorrow could not change what had happened. It could only change what would happen. And so we're marked outwardly by our guilt as well. So the ultimate question is, what do we do about it? What do we do about the skulls in our swamp? What do we do about the guilt that we carry? I mean, we can try frantically to get ourselves out of the mess, to undo the damage, to unload the guilt, and many people try, but little avail. Dietrich Bonhoeffer put it this way: if you board the wrong train, it is no use running along the corridors in the opposite direction. You see, all of our efforts to escape the prison of guilt are about as effective as running through the corridor of a train that's going the wrong way. We can justify ourselves to others, but we still know. In Sydney, Australia, not long ago, a desperate prisoner finally succeeded in escaping from jail. And he had scampered into the undercarriage of a delivery truck that had stopped briefly in the prison warehouse. And so he held on desperately as the truck drove out of the prison. And a few minutes later, when the truck stopped, the prisoner dropped to the ground and rolled outward to freedom, or so he thought, only to find himself in the courtyard of another prison just 5 miles away. And see, all of our efforts to escape guilt on our own do little more than this. They just move us from one prison to another. If only we could be rid of it. If only we could be rid of this heavy awareness of what we have done. Luther put it, you know how it goes. Those sins of thought, those sins of word, those sins of deed, those sins not only of what we have done, but of what we have left undone that should have been done, right? If only we could send our minds and our souls to the cleaners and just pick them up next week, all sparkling and fresh. Louise Fletcher put that into poetic terms with these lines. I wish that there were some wonderful place called the land of beginning again, where all our mistakes and all our heartaches and all our poor selfish grief could be dropped like a shabby old coat at the door and never put on again. Have you ever wished that? Jesus Christ came into this world saying that that is exactly what we can do. We can begin again. In spite of the scars, in spite of the pain, in spite of the damage, to the woman standing in guilt before him and to her arrogant accusers too, he said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Is that not Paul's message to us this morning in the message from Colossians? Is it not shining light on the skulls in our swamp? You see, the Colossians, they were people just like us, and often we're tempted to think that we're not smart enough, we don't understand enough, or we don't live well enough to be acceptable to God and to qualify for His kingdom. We got too many skulls buried around, and we constantly are saying, we. But Paul addresses this Colossian heresy, and he very clearly points out that guilt is removed, not by we. But did you listen to Frank's emphasis in the reading of the lesson? He has qualified us. He has delivered us. He has transferred us. He has created us. And finally, He has reconciled or brought us back to Himself, having made peace through the blood of His cross. Jesus once said, "The truth shall make you free." Not just any truth, but His truth, which says, yes, there was a price to be paid for our guilt, and He chose to pay it so that we don't have to. Jesus did not tell the adulterous woman that she could change what had happened already. He did tell her that she could leave it behind her and in forgiveness start over. And folks, this is the mechanism that makes all our other beliefs come to life. I mean, what's the point of belief in God or belief in Christ or belief in the church if the believer is permanently stained by our sins? But because we believe in the forgiveness of sin, each of these other beliefs throbs to life and it enriches us. It is the promise of God to each of us, however far we have fallen, however many promises we have broken, and trust that we have betrayed, He forgives us and we can start over and walk in newness of life. For it is the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in Him and through Him to bring back all things to Himself, having made peace through the blood of His cross through Him. So, my friends, whatever skulls you have buried, God does not hate you for them. He loves you. And that is the message of the cross. Let the light shine on the skulls in your swamp. And also, always for you and I, folks, there will be some kind of skull buried in some kind of swamp because we are skull-burying people. It is our nature. And we will bear guilt. But one and all this day, we stand gratefully before Christ, forgiven of our sin for His sake, not fearing the consequences of them before God for His sake, and determined once more that we will go and sin no more for His sake. I have you watch a video right now. A guy named James. And the skulls in James' swamp have destroyed his relationship with his family. And he finds that the only way, I quote, to recover your soul and transform your life is to surrender and trust God. Watch this. Technological difficulties. All right, here's what we're going to do. There's no sound with it, is what we've got. This is powerful, folks. So what we're going to do is we're going to post it on our website. Linda, if we can do that. Watch it sometime this week as a devotion. Because what you'll find is that James finally figures out he'd been a lifelong heroin addict. His addiction cost him his family. He spent 10 years never being able to get in touch with his brother or his dad, whom he loves dearly. And as a result of God coming into his life, it doesn't change the past, but it changes his future. And it can do so for you as well. Surrender to God and trust Him with all your heart.